Thank you for staying with us. This is Good Morning Kenya. My name is Vivian Degwa. We turn things down a bit from our political segment and we get to our family check segment. And today our conversation actually came from last week's discussion where we were talking about, do women forgive and forget? Then another topic came up, and that is the topic we have today, where we are asking you, do men learn from past mistakes? Yes, that is the conversation we will be having today. We got to speak to a number of you on the streets. That will be going up in the middle of our conversation. But before that, allow me to introduce my panelists for this conversation. I have with me on my immediate left, we have Fred Abok. Fred Abok is a transformation speaker, a life coach, and pastor. Welcome to Good Morning Kenya. All right, and on my far left, we have Duncan Juma. Duncan Juma was here last week. He is a life coach. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vivian.
It's a pleasure to have you gentlemen on set. I wish we had another lady on set, because I don't know how this conversation will go with both men here. I hope you're not going to be biased.
Sure.
But anyway, let's go with it. When we talk about one learning from their own mistakes, how does that look like, first of all?
Thank you, Vivian. I think that's both on the high rise and on the low. Either learning from past mistake involve being cautious, but of course also getting on the overdrive and doing it better. Doing it better in that you don't succumb into the same circumstance that you find yourself in on the past. But of course, to me, I measure it as a bit of cylindrical, in that it involves emotions, it involves the masculinity, and it also involves the environment at which you really want to make things show up for. So that it's systematic, that you find yourself trying to make things better than the way they were, or be cautious on how you do them this time around.
All right. Your thought on that, Duncan?
Well, I think the question, do men learn from their mistakes, was mischievous, especially based on the last kind of discussion where we were asking, do women forgive and forget? So it was essentially asking, do the men, maybe when they make relationship mistakes, do they really look like they learn? But in the broader sense of it, everyone learns from their mistakes. But then when you look
How does that look like, you learning from your mistakes?
Yes, and that's what I'm explaining, that it looks like you say, you know, I tasted vinegar and I want to prefer honey, and maybe there's a bit of change towards, you know, honey. So basically change of behavior, change of, you know, creation of boundaries, or looking like you have learned, or at least a bit more humility, or pretense that there's need for you to be humble. Yeah, so that would look like learning, so to say, in a nutshell. Yeah, so a bit of change, a bit of relooking at things differently, maybe changing of activity, workplace, moving places. That looks like lessons. Yeah, but of course the bigger question is whether that happens or not.
So is there a difference in how men and females approach them learning from their mistakes? Do you feel there is a difference in how men do it and how also women get to, you know, approach that?
Definitely. For women, women don't forgive, they accommodate. They can be there reminding you of your past mistake, but of course, due to circumstances, they got to be with you, regardless. And of course, popping them up. But men get to move on pretty fast because of their low emotional dynamic, in that they are focused onto what next and how to make things better. The reason why you find a man leave one wife with 2 children that he sire to go and be a responsible man of 4 children that he did not sire is basically to say that, yes, I move on and I'm looking for my peace and I'm looking for make up things better. Yes, and you know, still these children that are left on with this woman, he can still also take care of them. It's just showing that I am not emotional about what happened, but I'm out to make things better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's clearly a difference in how females, you know, approach learning from their mistakes and how compared to how male or men get to learn from their own mistakes.
Yeah, that's true
Yeah.
in the sense that, as we've been told, women reflect quite a little bit before they finally make that decision. It can take an emotional toll on them, as it has been explained. But I feel like for men, we sort of have a very short threshold to think it over because we are heavily solution-centric. We kind of draw the line of best fit. Someone tells you they're having a headache and you're like, you know what, a headache shouldn't kill you. There's war in Gaza, you know, so like there's a way it could have been worse and maybe we don't know how to communicate that. But in terms of then dealing with mistakes, sometimes there's a level at which also men take in too much and rarely will it show up. And again, in the context of the society we live in, men have not been given space to be 100% themselves. So they have to live with a certain persona that society sort of accepts. For example, I can't be vulnerable. If I tell my family or my wife that we are broke and I'm trusting God, then perhaps what they're hearing is we are going to die tomorrow. And for me, then maybe I'll come and say, kuna deal, iko karibu kuiva, you know? So maybe, so how we unpack that also looks, but how ladies think and reflect, they think a little deeper, a lot more in terms of the consequences, the emotions involved. But for us, I think as men, we tend to reflect very briefly and sort of find out what's the line of best fit. How do I come out of here? What's the best fit for everyone? Yeah, so we are different in that sense.
Yeah, and maybe just still on that, how exactly or what factors get to influence, you know, on whether this man will get to learn from their mistake? Are there factors that influence that? We can still start with you.
Well, I think we're assuming that we learn, by and large, let me put it this way, men die, our life expectancy levels are lower than the last averaging was 57 for men in Kenya. I think 62, it went to 67 for the women. So there's also a silent assumption that, you know, you might go fast. And that's why you'll find even in HR circles, men are rarely the next of kin, you know. There's a sister, a mother, who is older than the man who is put on that list. And so
that's confirmed.
It's confirmed data. This is HR data. Men are rarely the next of kin, while you find that 90% of the men is their wife who is the next of kin and stuff like that. So how, because of that, again, do we learn from our mistakes? I think, look at the risk levels that men take. I mean, look at the people who put up repair glasses on KICC or whatever. You know, almost all those, you know, when you look at that, then you ask. And I mean, it's also possible to see a man fall from there and then another one actually climbing up. So the question is, do we learn? Maybe, maybe not. But also there's a thrill of being a man. Think of it this way. Maybe I should say it this way. Society hasn't allowed us to not make, to learn from our mistakes. For example, you will hear independent women, you've heard of that narrative, an independent woman, but when they tell you the kind of man they want a very traditional man, protective, provider, then you're like, same script, just a different format in terms of how it's dressed. So we rarely, I think our risk appetite for risks tells us that we rarely learn from mistakes. And rarely do we also learn from other people's mistakes. There's something in the men's circles called something must kill a man. And so in that sense, we maybe the way to reflect it, to say we learn our lessons in a different way. Let me give an example. If I came to a space where I'm having an altercation maybe with my wife or girlfriend or whoever, and I have to be extremely vulnerable and say, yes, it is true, I did it, then looks like the power games there changes. So I would rather die than reach to a place. It is for you to discern and figure out that I'm saying I'm sorry, but I'm not going to kneel and, you know, kowtow at you because of that, I may not look like I have learned, I may not look like I've not learned, but I may have learned. It's just that now how I confess my lessons looks different. And to that sense, it may look like we don't learn. However, having said that, many times when you look at our risk levels and the things we do for society, looks like we are going to be here for some time.
Yeah. We were talking, I got the point of rule number 1, deny. Rule number 2, refer to rule number 1. Rule number 3, refer to rule number 1 and 2. So it's deny, deny. Do not accept your mistake.
That's not what I said.
You said something along those lines. And by the way, just what role exactly does one recognizing their mistake play in you learning now from the mistake?
I think the role of taking responsibility, of just doing up, as much as men do not really be vulnerable to an extent of accepting that, yes, I did a mistake. There is an element of taking responsibility out of what they did to make things better. And you know, men are solution-oriented. They really not much dwell on the past mistake. That's why if you find a man who is on a phone call with the mother for 30 minutes, man, something is wrong. But a woman can be on phone call for 1 hour, talking and repeating out everything. They want to be point
something is wrong when they're on call?
No, they are solution-oriented in that they want to, they want, what is the solution out of this? You know, what do I make out of it? If you find a man on the supermarket buying tomatoes and getting onto the greenery, he's simply telling the woman that I don't trust you with your finances. I don't want to make up things better. So I would rather buy them myself than giving you money and then begin to ask you later, how did you then spend the money? Because the other time you didn't spend it all right. So I would rather get on, you know, get on the butcher and, you know, make up everything. As much as I want my family to have food, but on the other hand, I do not want to be in back and forth because of the past spending. A woman will get in the supermarket and will finish 1 hour checking the expiry dates.
That's true.
Of what and how better this. Men, women, are they consumable? Are they, you know, you look at the big picture, and that's it for a man. And so when a man takes responsibility, it simply shows that they have learned. If you guys had an alteration because it's coming at midnight, and then it begins coming early and watching on his sports and you know, watching on soccer, and of course the remote is next to him, what you can only do for him is serve him a good coffee. And I'll tell him, why did you come back? I know I'm taking responsibility, and I don't want the quarrel we did last time.
Yeah. Can we say that, you know, men's masculinity and just how maybe most men have been brought up, rather, and, you know, them being expected to bounce back from things very quickly. You know, a man is expected to just bounce back. You had this issue, maybe you were down for a minute, but you're expected to bounce back very quickly. Would you say that bounce back mentality may hinder, you know, maybe a point where it's hindering their ability or your ability to get to take your time to reflect and learn the lesson that you were meant to learn while you were at that point where this was a mistake, I was at a low point?
Yes, and again, that undertone, the right there, tells us about how society sees men. Men are expected to look strong and be strong.
Yeah.
What men don't know is that every title you're given as a man has a financial implication. It has. Anytime they call you Bazoo, just know something is going to leave. As a matter of fact, you're rated based on your ability to look like you have it all together.
Yeah.
Think of even how society is. You meet a man molesting a lady in public, all the men will beat up that man. But if it's a lady is beating up a man, chances are the other men will be cheering him on. So this bounce back thing, I think there's a level at which men must start to understand that, one, they need to take care of themselves by nature, knowing that they are on their own. Because sometimes it is your bank balance that may be giving you room to buy whatever you're buying around yourself, and you might be very far away from your original GPS location. And so you must really reflect and look at yourself without necessarily the baggage of I'm providing, you're still good enough, whether your bank balance is nil or not. And at that point, if you make peace with that kind of little boy in you, you know, you sort of okay. And this bouncing back, you don't have to look strong for society. There's a level at which you need. But to that end, the reason also I would have said earlier that men rarely learn from their mistakes is because men need a safety net in another man. But remember, men don't gather unless there's an alpha male in their midst. It's like, you know, women can gather and you can see them crying with tissue throwing, saying that how that guy is the name of an animal, then all of a sudden they're okay holding hand with that guy who they call an animal in the supermarket. But for a man, when I'm coming to my fellow man, if I'm telling him a problem, it's because he has the ability to fix it. We don't share problems for the sake.
For empathy purposes.
Yes. And again, many times we deny others permission to jump into our situation. So I can come to him and say, hey, dude, I'm going through stuff with my relationship, but I'm working on it.
But you don't want to
Right
get
there, I have
vulnerable
told you,
about
yes,
it.
it is true, whatever rumors you hear, but I've also told you, you don't have to jump into it.
Yeah,
and
I
so by the
got
time a man is asking for help, many times it's almost going down. Like it's, so based on that, I think we must also learn that it's not about you bouncing back every now and then. It's also good to seek help early and perhaps look at the people who can support you. So you need a group of men who can actually tell you also you're goofing in that sense. But I don't think it's going to come from ladies. And I think ladies expect too much that men are going to bow down and look vulnerable before them. I don't think it's going to happen as long as Africa exists.
Okay. As long as Africa exists. Wow. Anyway, we got to speak to a number of you on the streets. So how about we get to listen in to some of your comments on the same conversation?
It's a very wrong notion that men do not learn from their mistakes. Actually, I think the perspective that people think that men do not learn from their mistakes has been turned on to men as an unfortunate thing. So for me, I think men can be really educated upon, like, being enhanced upon the knowledge of trying to get into nature of trying to be elevated from the nature of trying to get people to understand what men really want and men really want to do in their lives.
Actually, not the mistake. It depends with the character of someone, how someone has grown, his principles. There are some people who learn, some don't. Just like in school, there are some people who get knowledge, some don't.
Why should we learn? Under which book are we being told to learn? Historically, did Adam learn from Eve? Did Samson learn from Delilah? Has your father learned anything? Or did my father learn anything? The kind of situation that we are put through with our other gender makes us not to learn. Just ask anybody, these young guys, if they are ready to marry, they'll tell you no. Ask them why. Because of what they've undergone. And so why would you give them that opportunity to learn? It depends with an individual. But currently, even if you look at the current generation, 80% of them, they'll tell you that they are not even ready to courtship. That's why there's this unauthorized relationship. Look at these young ladies, look at these young boys. They'll tell you, even I have a son who tells me he doesn't think he's ready to mingle with this other. You ask them, what did they do to you? The first thing they tell you, they are not trustworthy.
They don't. I mean, once you're forgiven, si utaona ni kama huyu nikirudia tena atanisamehea tu, so you don't learn. You'll repeat the same mistake again and again.
Quite often men only probably seek medical checkup whenever they are sick. So they don't actually take care of their health. We only go to hospitals when we feel something is probably feeling some pain, or rather, when we feel something is extremely wrong with us. So I don't think we've learned from the past mistakes.
Yes, we do learn from our mistakes. So for me, the past mistake that I had learned from is from the Valentine's Day mistake. So I had not bought flowers for my girl, and I needed to have bought flowers for my girl. So she ended up like being so frustrated about my situation. But now I understand that flowers have a meaning towards something. So whatever mistake that you've made in the past, whatever it might be, men do learn from their mistakes and they do show up for the next thing, if it is like correcting the next thing.
Just assumptions that anything will change. But when you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, that will not happen.
There are so many things which are going on right now, and there are so many dynamics which are going on right now. So I believe from time to time, there are so many things which are coming into relationships, talk about finances, talk about family ties. So I believe we are not there yet, but it's something that we need to learn so that we don't become victims of what has happened in the past. So I believe there's more that men can do about the issues we just raised.
Well, and that is your say or your take. And I want to engage the gentleman in studio with me just to get to maybe respond to some of the things that have been said, you know. I've picked on at least I think 3 or 4. You know, there's the one who said it depends on their principles. One's principles may depend on whether they will learn from their mistake or not. There's one who was very brutal and he asked why. Why should we learn from our mistakes as men? You know, did Adam learn from, you know, did Samson learn from Delilah's story? And then there's the other one who said, you know, they actually do accept learning from their mistake and they realized they had not bought flowers for the girlfriend during Valentine's and it caused problems. So he learned that lesson. So and got to know that, you know, he should buy flowers. So maybe if you can just speak from the ones that we've gotten to listen from and just your response on that.
Yeah, I think quick one is the gentleman who highlighted about men not learning in terms of their self-care, that we only ask for help when it's really dire. And he's talking about at what point do we go for checkup, for example.
Oh, yeah,
I know very few men, even in these corporate organizations where there's maybe employee wellness programs, they'll tell you go check yourself for whether it's prostate or whatever. I know, unless there's something emerging, you know, there's someone who said, ile kitu unatafuta utaipata, so we don't go for checkup very early. Many times then things may have escalated, and that, in that sense, we don't know what we need to do so that we can learn and be better. But there's also a gentleman who talked about flowers. I mean, he learned and someone said the only way to remember your girlfriend's birthday is to forget it once. And in that sense, you learn that this has consequences. However, sometimes we know the consequences, and because we want a little bit of banter, we want to sleep at peace, and you want her a little annoyed, you come without them so that it works magic. But to be fair, there is also someone who said, you know, why should we? I think there's a gentleman who highlighted even his son's issue. Yeah. There's an issue around maybe access levels to beauty, which is largely from a man's perspective, heavily pegged on your bank balance. And sometimes this young man who sees an age mate of sorts having access to maybe babas, for lack of a better word, and this guy doesn't have money, and these other people like 100,000 shillings and all that. So the terrain is so unequal to a place where now you start asking, what lessons should we pick here? And you heard that there are sentiments around the boy child who's saying, you know what, this is unfair. However, those very boy children, when they start getting money, almost the cycle begins again. So do we learn? Maybe it's a question to continue asking.
Yeah. Fred?
Yes, so basically from what the outcome is, men do learn. It's just that they learn from who? So you don't expect the person who created the mishap to again be the provider of the solution for a man to learn from. So men do learn. But of course, the masculinity, cylindrical man, put a man in cognizance of what they have not done right. And of course, on the process of learning, then they take the risk to do something better. Because men are both compassionate but also environmentally oriented. Based on what happened where, determine how am I sorting out this situation. But of course, the fact that it happened, do we need to really dwell on it, or can we be able to change it and make it better? I'm struggling on to pay rent. But of course, I also still, on the other side, wants to maintain class. Do I get onto another environment and just make sure that my friends are limited? Right? But you know, what are the same focus? Do people eat? Do my kids go to school? And all this other aspect. Rather than how do my house look like and all these other things. So men do learn? Yes, they do. It's just that from who? They would rather learn from the compartment, but not necessarily will they learn from the person who orchestrated the situation. Yeah.
There's the one who talked about it depends on one's principles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we learn, it's just as he has said, our learning is different. Because sometimes when you ask the question, do men learn from their mistakes, we're almost saying we have a script and we need to see how the lessons go. Yeah, but by and large, we're also saying we learn. I mean, we learn from our past mistakes, and it's just that also the space to be forgiven, to say you've learned, sometimes is missing. So, and those are conversations that we must continually have to keep. Another aspect around whether we actually get to fully learn, there are mistakes that we will continually sort of do to ourselves or to the people around us if we don't reflect enough. But is the space enough?
Yeah.
The life of a man, sort of, you wake up, you're supposed to provide for your family and all that, and almost like work starts to give meaning to a man, which I don't think it gives meaning to the ladies as much. A man, there is no man who doesn't want to provide for his woman, for his children. There is no man.
Yeah.
So in that sense, work gives men purpose. And so if you make mistakes in the course of doing that, rarely are you forgiven. Maybe you think of scenarios where your rent is late.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, how many times have you heard people say the lady has a private account? And you know, and many times, think of it this way, there are spaces where a man can access the woman's money at zero interest, but always it comes with conditions. Nimeomba kwa chama, lazima urudishe. You know, make sure you bring it back. So then in that sense, he knows he's doing the donkey work, and maybe help may not be on the way. So in that sense, they almost charter their own journey slightly within, yet still lending themselves to giving meaning to saying, I'm providing for my family. But there are mistakes that also are brutal to confess and say you've learned from.
Yeah.
And sometimes men die with those mistakes. And, you know, there are times people go to heaven, then you discover they have been living with other mistakes around. And so in that sense, do we learn? Maybe if peace comes from away, maybe we may not look like we learned. But then the question is, what are we looking for as we look like we are not learning the mistakes? I've said so many things right there, but I pray there's wisdom to
Actually,
unpack.
there's something you've said.
Yeah.
I can see you want to say something on that, but still maybe on that, there's something you've said that I had a question on the same, whereby the question was, are there particular or certain areas where men are more likely to learn from their mistakes other than other areas of their lives?
Yes, we do. I mean, COVID came, sorry to just jump in there, then give him a chance. COVID came and taught us that maybe providing may not be the only way that should define who we are, because times came when the ladies weren't bringing in the bread, and there was a lot of imbalance. So there are times and opportunities where you actually get to learn that you pick your lessons from your mistakes, maybe opening other channels of bringing income and stuff like that. So they are there. It's just that, as I mentioned, do we pick our lessons with the people we're living? Because sometimes the assumption also is that it's the people who are causing or picking the mistakes that we should be vulnerable and say we've learned lessons or behave like we. But there are many faces to a man outside that combination that may look. Men love toys, for example. They just get more expensive with time. Men try, if the person with pressure within the house keeps inserting, you live beyond your means, but are you learning? You know, those are the questions. But go ahead.
Okay.
I think when it comes on to principles, men do not have a particular pattern of learning. And that's why men have a challenge of being very effective in a class setup, but rather than in a social aspect. So when you are dealing with a man, especially in a counseling, a man wants to maybe hear your story on what you went through, so that you do not look like an angel that has landed from heaven and you have a masterpiece of all that is going on, and you want to make it transferable to them. But rather, when I got into this situation, they may not be the same, but these are some of the maneuvers that I did, and not necessarily telling him that this is what you ought to do. They pick one or two things that they can be able to do different out of your story. They will always learn from you out of your basically what you've gone through. And that's why in a setup of where men are gathered and they are talking, and especially in a social setup, you will find people sharing stories, and men will be very keen about how someone has actually get out of a quagmire and be able to success or pick up themselves out of a distorted situation and align to their purpose. They will maybe ask a question, a provoking question later that make you sense that, oh, this guy was attentive to what I was sharing. But basically, you are not targeting them. Yes.
Yeah, and on the matter of whether there are particular areas that men are likely to learn from their mistakes rather than other areas, like is that a thing?
Definitely. Of course, once beaten, twice shy. They become more conscious. You know, when you're dealing with a failed marriage, you're a bit more conscious, and you'll find a man vulnerable to their wives. Not because that's a system of how to do things, but they do not want to find themselves in the same setup again and being looked at, because men are very conscious about the environment. What are people says about me out there? They want to carry a name that goes on behind them. You know, a woman will divorce and get married on here and still vie on for a position of an MP. Or a man, you try to be a chairman of Nyumba Kumi, people ask you, who's your wife?
Yeah.
And you know, that's the last thing that a man will want to hear if he doesn't have. And maybe if somebody know that it failed. So they will be cautious about those processes and being a bit more vulnerable to those situations so that it doesn't repeat again.
Yeah. As we almost come to a close of this conversation, maybe can one's upbringing or one's culture affect their ability to get to be open to learning from their mistakes?
Yeah, of course. In psychology, you say nature, nurture. There are contexts that make us behave in a certain kind of way. Like from where I come from, it's not easy for a man to be vulnerable. You're taught to be tough, to look tough, and in that sense, then you don't share your issues. You know, in public, you don't pour dirty linen in public. You raise. How many times you see a daughter being raised, and everyone is calling them an angel, princess, you know, and mostly it's their father doing that. But to a man, you fall down there like mwanaume kaza, you know, ngangari, you know, things like that. So be a man, you know. So, which is not very defined. So environment has heavily a way of defining. How many of us live beyond our means because our friends look like they have it together because we don't know the outer story? Yeah. How many of us don't take care of their health because mbinguni tutapewa mwili mpya, you know? So there are contexts that allow you not to be. And by the way, even when I mentioned about the COVID context, and reaching a place to say, I am down and I need to maybe cut down. Because men rarely want to, if you're in a particular cadre or in a particular level of your life, rarely do you want to go slightly lower. And maybe that could be the right step you need to make for you to go to that next level. So the environment, if everyone around you has a car, there's a chance you can easily get depressed because you feel like you've been left out. And I think those are learnings we must. So nature, but also some personalities, you know. There are people who are very outspoken, and chances of them saying something or their mouth getting them into more trouble than ever before than others is easier. So again, wiring, nature, but also environment as well.
Okay. And we need to finish.
Of course, there are the three principles that men are raised up on.
Very quickly.
Yeah. They're naturally meant to be priests.
Okay, priests.
They need to call forth, and of course they need to be princes. They need to be prince, in that they stand out, and of course they need to be providers. Okay. And that's why the bill always come onto the side of the man.
All right, we have to wind up. Goodbye.